Hi everyone, I am super excited to talk about today's book, which was one of my top reads of the year so far, up there with The Idiot by Elif Batuman, although in a completely different genre. This book was The Lemon Tree by Sandy Tolan, subtitled An Arab, a Jew, and the Heart of the Middle East. My sister suggested for our little family book club that we read something about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and this book that she selected was an excellent choice. Obviously, this is a fraught topic that is painfully relevant to this day, but it can be tough to learn about this conflict, as it's hard to find accounts that tell the story without becoming too prescriptive about what should happen next, or too judgmental about who's right and who's wrong. And I don't mean that there's no room at all for such discussion as long as there's nuance, but I don't think it's all that helpful for people who, like me before reading this book, know close to nothing about the historical or cultural context of this conflict and are simply trying to understand what's going on today through the lens of history. And I think it's important to understand this historical lens before engaging with any sort of political or ideological debate on the topic. But this book filled that desire perfectly. More than anything, this is a story of conflict between two nations, framed within the stories of two people, an Israeli and a Palestinian, and the dialogue that occurs between them. I loved this book because it shows the beauty of the Jews of Israel and the Arabs of Palestine, and the complexity of the struggle between them and the struggles that each group has faced, in a way that makes us want to support and side with both of them, which is a weird feeling, of course, since it often seems like their goals are mutually incompatible. And the goal of this book isn't to paint one side as an aggressor, or to play down the very aggressive actions taken by both sides. The goal also isn't to simply wave away the possibility of real discussion or finding a place of compromise. The book doesn't concern itself really with figuring out who's right, and yet it does an excellent job of portraying why people on both sides of the conflict think they're right to various extents. So how is that achieved? Well, the book combines a historical account of the past about 70 years with the true stories of two families on opposite sides of the conflict. Thus, the historical events of the narrative feel intensely relevant as we meet, and in my case at least, come to love, both a Sephardic Jewish woman, Dalia, and an Arab Palestinian man, Bashir. And the core interpersonal tension of this book comes from the interactions that occur when Bashir and his cousins, now refugees in the West Bank, return to visit their home in Ramleh, which is now occupied by Dalia's family. Roughly 20 years before this meeting, Dalia's parents migrated to Israel from their former home in Bulgaria after narrowly escaping deportation to the death camps of the Holocaust, all of which comprises another fascinating historical chapter of this book. A quick note, I'm not really going to give any spoilers in this review, and this is a book that could be considered to have spoilers since most readers like me will be wondering what happens to Dalia and Bashir and to their relationship. So I'm going to avoid revealing too much about that, but I will discuss the overall themes of the book as they relate to the two characters. The historical writing is good, especially in that it conveys the legitimacy of both the Israelis and the Palestinians' concerns without minimizing the harm that both sides have inflicted on one another and the need for a more lasting peace. It also managed to teach me about a lot of fascinating and important historical events in a way that retained its urgency and sense of nearness, which is the kind of account that I absolutely love when reading a history book. Now, this isn't properly a history book in its entirety, but if you've watched a lot of my other videos, you'll know that I've gotten pretty interested in reading about history, especially that of the 20th century, and the historical sections in this book definitely lived up to the standard of detail and rigor that I hoped for, while remaining on point and not straying too far from the main action of the story. Nevertheless, the history is not what I or most readers will remember the most coming out of this book. The narrative and emotional heart of the story lies with our main characters Dalia and Bashir. Sandy Tolan paints these characters' stories in a way that impressively manages to represent the larger struggles of Israel and Palestine, but without ever reducing these characters, in my mind, to mere symbols. Honestly, this book conveyed more emotion than just about anything I've read this year, which is especially impressive given that more than half of the text is historical. But the intertwined stories of Dalia and Bashir are just so good. Throughout the story, they both remain painfully human, and I loved them for their resilience and their courage and openness, but also, frankly, for their frustrating closedness in certain areas, which was evident in both of them from the beginning to the end of the story. Both characters show great openness and empathy in relating to one another, but also reveal their own limitations in what they are willing or able to sacrifice. And ultimately, this was just totally understandable to me, given how deeply their entire identities are intertwined with this same land. Some readers might argue that Dahlia is really more open-minded than Bashir, which is a viewpoint I could understand, but I also disagree with. Just like Bashir, Dahlia is attached to what she sees as her home and her people's home in Israel or Palestine. To me, the main difference is simply that between the two of them, Dahlia is the one who currently holds the relative position of power because she is the one currently occupying this disputed territory. Bashir, on the other hand, feels a sense of urgency to return to what he sees as his rightful home in Ramleh, since his immediate personal situation as he sees it right now is unacceptable and will be unacceptable until he can return to his true home. If there exists what we could call a high road and a low road to resolving this conflict, it kind of makes sense that Dahlia would be able to take the high road, since she's in this position of greater relative stability, and with more to lose in the immediate short term from direct conflict. So as a result of this dynamic, Bashir becomes so single-mindedly focused on his right to return to his home in a way that is admirable, but in some cases does close him off to compromise or seeing others' perspectives, which we see in his disagreements with PLO leader Yasser Arafat's more compromising approach. Dahlia is compassionate and open, and yet it takes her a long time to reckon with the ramifications of her living in stolen land, while also understanding the impossibility of just giving it back. She never quite seems to understand how Bashir can think the way that he does. Although to both of their credit, actually, I'm just going to cut myself off there, because to say much more would be getting a little spoilery, and I really just think that you should read this book and experience the characters for yourself. The bottom line is that for all these reasons, the characters are just so fundamentally likable for me, which was perfect for helping me empathize with experiences from both sides of the conflict. And I really appreciated that the dialogue in this book contains this sense of hope and goodwill, but without ever going so far as to seem excessively sanguine or that is over-optimistic about the prospects of immediate reconciliation. The main characters, Bashir and Dahlia, are perfect manifestations of this overall theme, where on one hand there's a certain desire to see the humanity of one's declared enemies, but also this persistent impediment in breaking through one's own cultural and political preconceptions about how the world should be. Their stories are inspiring and sobering at the same time, in a way that feels very human and very realistic, and ultimately I think that's what made me appreciate this book so very much. A lot of other themes, both personal and political, are skillfully discussed in this book, enough to make the reader think about them without pretending to offer clear answers. Who ultimately has the right to live in a place, and what circumstances change that, if any? Is a mutual understanding possible between people with values and priorities that are in direct conflict by definition? Tolan explores the paradox whereby such understanding feels on one hand utterly impossible, and on the other hand absolutely essential, since neither side is willing to give up fighting for this goal until they've achieved it. There's also the question of what does it mean when someone's personal identity is fundamentally wrapped up in something or somewhere that they have lost, and that seems almost impossible to regain again. And then there's the question of what makes someone a terrorist, really. Is it the actions that they commit, or the lack of sanction by a globally recognized government? Do we really just know an act of terrorism when we see it, or is the word terrorist more of a word that's wielded politically to mark the other or the enemy as terrifying, in a way that goes beyond the essence of whatever so-called actions of terror were perpetrated? And then, as an extension to these questions, is it ever justifiable, or at least partially justifiable, based on one's political circumstances? Tolan won't pretend that he knows the answers to these questions, or that you should either, since in my opinion many of them don't have clean right and wrong answers, but he at least succeeds in making you think about them as you read this story. So this was a great book. Hopefully, if you've listened to the review this far, you now have an idea of whether this book would be valuable and interesting for you. The answer is yes, by the way, but that's just my take. In any case, if you enjoyed my review and want to hear more discussions about this topic and a whole variety of other books, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye, and happy reading.